Lieutenant Ethan Carter had always considered himself a careful diplomat. He studied alien cultures, memorized important customs, and followed protocols to avoid misunderstandings. Yet, as he sat in the grand hall of the Valtteri homeworld, he had no idea he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career, one that could change his life forever. The Valtteri were an impressive species. They stood taller than humans, their bodies covered in sleek fur, with sharp eyes that glowed under the golden lights of the council chamber. Their tails were long and elegant, moving fluidly behind them like banners in the wind. Ethan had been sent as part of a diplomatic mission to strengthen the alliance between Earth and the Valtteri Dominion. Humans had only recently joined the interstellar community, and this meeting was an important step toward peace and cooperation. Sitting across from him was Karila, the Valtteri ambassador. She was one of the highest-ranking officials of her people, known for her intelligence and strict adherence to tradition. Her fur was a deep silver color, and her tail flicked behind her as she read over the latest trade proposals. Ethan shifted in his seat, waiting for a response. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the floating data pads hovering in front of each delegate. He watched as Karilla's sharp claws tapped against her screen, her golden eyes scanning the documents carefully. After a long pause, she finally looked up. "These terms are acceptable," she said, her voice smooth but firm. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "That's great to hear, Ambassador Karila. I believe this agreement will benefit both of our worlds." Karila nodded, but her expression remained unreadable. The Valtteri were not as expressive as humans, and Ethan had learned that their emotions were often hidden behind calm, serious faces. A soft chime echoed through the hall, signaling a short break before the next discussion. Ethan reached for his data pad to make a quick note, but as he did, his fingers accidentally brushed against something soft and smooth. It was Karilla's tail. A sharp gasp echoed through the chamber. The air in the room grew heavy, and every Valtteri delegate froze in place. The quiet hum of conversation disappeared, replaced by complete, stunned silence. Ethan blinked in confusion. Why was everyone staring at him like that? He looked around, trying to understand what had just happened. Karilla's fur bristled, her golden eyes wide with shock. She stared at Ethan as if he had just committed an unthinkable crime. Ethan swallowed. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said quickly, pulling his hand back. "That was an accident." But Karilla didn't respond. She stood up so quickly that her chair scraped against the smooth floor. Her tail flicked once, a movement Ethan couldn't interpret, but the look in her eyes was unmistakable. Shock, confusion, maybe even outrage. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the chamber, her long strides carrying her away before Ethan could say anything else. The silence in the room remained, thick with tension. Finally, one of the Valtteri officials, a gray-furred male with piercing blue eyes, cleared his throat and said in a hushed, serious voice, "Human, do you understand what you have done?" Ethan frowned. "It was just an accident. I barely touched her tail." Another sharp intake of breath from the Valtteri. The official stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "In our culture, touching one's tail is not something done casually. It is an act of great significance." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Significance? What kind of significance? The official exchanged glances with the other Valtteri before looking back at Ethan. "It is our most sacred bonding ritual." Ethan's mind went blank. Wait, what? The official's tone became even more serious. "By touching Ambassador Karilla's tail, you have initiated a bond that cannot be undone." Ethan's mouth went dry. He looked around, hoping someone would tell him this was a joke. Surely this was just some misunderstanding. But the way every Valtteri in the room looked at him, half in shock, half in awe, told him otherwise. He had just made first contact with an alien culture in the worst possible way. And worst of all, he had no idea what it meant for his future. Ethan Carter had been in difficult situations before. negotiating tense trade deals, calming angry diplomats, even diffusing a bar fight on a space station once. But nothing compared to standing in a silent council chamber, surrounded by Valtteri officials who were all staring at him like he had just proposed marriage to their ambassador. He blinked, still trying to process what the Valtteri official had just told him. A sacred bonding ritual. Ethan repeated slowly. The gray-furred official, whose name tag identified him as Counselor Jorvis, gave a slow nod. His blue eyes were serious, his tail swaying in a measured rhythm behind him. Yes, Jorvis confirmed. Among our people, touching another's tail is not done lightly. It is an intimate act, one that signifies a permanent bond between two individuals. You have, knowingly or not, initiated such a bond with Ambassador Karila. Ethan swallowed hard. But I didn't mean to. It was an accident. The intent does not change the meaning of the act, Jorvis said solemnly. Ethan's mind raced. This has to be a misunderstanding. Maybe there was a way to explain it properly, to clear things up before this became an even bigger issue. Just as he was about to speak, the chamber doors opened with a low hiss, and Karila stepped back in. Her silver fur had smoothed down, but her golden eyes still carried a storm of emotions. Confusion, frustration, and something Ethan couldn't quite name. The other Valtteri immediately straightened, their ears flicking in attention. She walked with purpose, stopping just a few steps away from Ethan. For a long, tense moment, she simply stared at him. Ethan resisted the urge to fidget. Ambassador Karila. She raised a hand, silencing him. Then, in a calm but firm voice, she spoke. The council has been informed, she said. They will expect an official decision. Ethan frowned. Decision. Karila's tail flicked once behind her. There are only two paths forward, she explained. By our customs, a bond once formed is not easily dismissed. I can either accept the bond and fulfill my duty, or I must reject it. Ethan hesitated. And if you reject it, Karila's golden eyes darkened. I will face exile from my people. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Exile. That's extreme. He looked around, searching the faces of the other Valtteri. Did they really expect her to make this choice, all because of one accidental touch? That's not fair, Ethan said, his voice firm. I didn't mean for this to happen. There has to be another way. Karila let out a slow breath. There is not. Silence filled the room again, heavy with unspoken tension. Ethan felt a mix of emotions, guilt for causing this situation, frustration at the lack of options, and a growing sense of responsibility. He had been sent here to strengthen the alliance between humanity and the Valtteri, not to cause a diplomatic crisis. He straightened, meeting Karila's gaze. Then, what would it mean if you accepted the bond? Karila's expression didn't change, but her ears twitched slightly. It would mean a lifelong connection, she said. By our laws, bonded pairs must stand together in all things, political decisions, personal matters, even battle if necessary. Ethan's mind whirled. A permanent partnership. Karila continued, her voice steady. It is not a light decision, and it is not easily undone. That is why exile is the only other choice. If I reject the bond, I will be seen as dishonorable, someone who has broken a sacred tradition. I would no longer be welcome among my people. Ethan exhaled. This wasn't just about some weird alien rule. This was Karila's entire life on the line. He looked at her again, truly looked at her. She wasn't just an ambassador. She was a leader, a warrior, someone who had dedicated her life to her people. And now, because of his one small mistake, she was facing a future where she might lose everything. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. He knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let that happen. Taking a deep breath, Ethan squared his shoulders. Then, what if I accept the bond? The entire chamber gasped. Karila's eyes widened slightly. You would do that? Ethan shrugged, trying to ignore the way his pulse was suddenly pounding. Well, it's not like I planned this. But if accepting means you don't lose your people, then maybe we can find a way to make it work. Karilla studied him carefully, her tail moving in slow, thoughtful patterns. You do not understand what you are offering, human, she said softly. This is not just a symbolic bond. It is a true one. Our laws will recognize it. The council will expect you to stand by my side, not just for a few days, but for life. Ethan swallowed. For life. That was a big commitment. But as he glanced around the room, he knew he had no real choice. If he walked away now, Karilla would be exiled. And if that happened, it could damage the fragile relationship between their species. So, with a deep breath, he looked Karilla in the eye and said the words that would change his future forever. Then I guess we're bonded now. The chamber erupted into stunned whispers. Karilla simply stared at him, unreadable for a long moment. Then, very softly, she sighed. So be it. The silence in the chamber was heavier than before. Ethan Carter could feel dozens of Volteri eyes staring at him, their expressions a mixture of shock, curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite place. He had just agreed to something he barely understood, a lifelong bond with an alien ambassador. And now Karilla, the Volteri in question, was still standing before him, staring at him with her piercing golden eyes. Her tail flicked behind her, slower than before, more controlled. But Ethan had a feeling that didn't mean she was calm. Finally, she spoke. You do not know what you have just done. Ethan let out a slow breath. You're right. I don't. He met her gaze steadily. But I do know that I couldn't let you be exiled for something that wasn't your fault. Karilla's ears flicked slightly at his words. There was no immediate response, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if he had just made things worse. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a soft sigh. Very well. The council will finalize the bond. Ethan blinked. That's it. No ceremony. No signing of documents. He had expected something more official. But before he could ask, Karilla turned sharply toward the other Volteri. Leave us. I will speak with the human alone. At once, the gathered officials and guards bowed their heads before filing out of the chamber. Ethan barely had time to process their quick obedience before the doors slid shut behind them, leaving him alone with the silver-furred ambassador. The moment the doors sealed, Karilla turned to him, and for the first time, Ethan saw real frustration in her expression. What were you thinking? She demanded. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Trying to stop you from getting banished. Karilla narrowed her eyes. You do not understand, human. This is not a simple diplomatic agreement. It is not something that can be undone. She stepped closer, her tail swaying in irritation. You have bound yourself to me, not just politically, but culturally. Ethan frowned. I get that. And like I said, I couldn't just let you be exiled. She studied him, silent for a moment. Then she exhaled and shook her head. I do not know if you are brave or simply foolish. Ethan chuckled. Maybe both. Karilla didn't return the humor. Instead, she folded her arms. There is another problem. Carter. He raised an eyebrow. Just one. She ignored his comment. This bond is not just between us. It will now be examined by the council, by the Dominion, and by your own people. Her golden eyes darkened slightly. And there will be many who do not approve. Ethan nodded slowly. Because I'm human. Karilla didn't immediately confirm, but her silence was enough. Finally, she said, there are those who believe our alliance with humanity is a mistake. Those who think your species is too reckless, too unpredictable. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Yeah, I've heard that before. Karilla's ears twitched slightly at his tone, but she continued. And now, I, one of the highest-ranking ambassadors, have been bonded to a human in a way that cannot be undone. There will be those who see this as a betrayal of our traditions. Ethan crossed his arms. And what about you? Do you see it that way? Karilla hesitated. It was only for a fraction of a second, but Ethan caught it. Finally, she sighed and looked away. I do not know. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He could tell she was struggling with this situation just as much as he was. Maybe even more. After a long pause, Karilla spoke again. For now, we must appear united. If we show division, our enemies will use it against us. Ethan straightened slightly. Enemies. Karilla's tail flicked. There are factions who oppose human-Volteri relations. Some of them are merely vocal. Others are more dangerous. Ethan frowned. You're talking about extremists. Karilla nodded. If they see this bond as a threat, they may attempt to disrupt it or eliminate it. Ethan's expression hardened. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about him. Karilla's life could be in danger because of something he had done. Karilla seemed to notice the shift in his posture. She studied him for a moment before saying, I will arrange for additional security. Ethan shook his head. You mean bodyguards? Yes. Ethan exhaled. I appreciate it, but I don't like the idea of hiding behind others while people plot against us. Karilla raised an eyebrow. Then what do you propose? Ethan thought for a moment, then gave a small smile. I propose we figure this out together. Karilla's ears twitched again. Was that amusement? But she only nodded. Very well, human. Let us see if you are as capable as you claim. Ethan smirked. I guess we're in this for the long haul. Karilla sighed. Yes, it seems we are. As they left the chamber, neither of them noticed the small drone hovering in the shadows, watching, recording, and transmitting their every word to an unknown recipient. Ethan Carter walked beside Karilla, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. A sacred bond. Political enemies. Possible assassination attempts. This was supposed to be a peaceful diplomatic visit, not the start of an interspecies thriller. The corridors of the Volteri embassy were quiet, lined with smooth metallic walls that shimmered under soft blue lighting. Despite the calm surroundings, Ethan could feel the tension in the air. Karilla's posture was stiff, her silver tail moving in slow, deliberate motions, a clear sign that she was deep in thought. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. So, what happens now? Karilla didn't look at him. Now the council will send an official announcement about our bond. Ethan frowned. Wait, they're telling everyone. Karilla finally turned to him, her golden eyes sharp. This is not something that can be hidden, human. Our laws are clear. Once a bond is formed, it must be recognized publicly. If we try to keep it secret, it will only cause suspicion. Ethan sighed. Great. So the whole galaxy is going to know I accidentally bonded with an alien ambassador. Karilla's ears twitched slightly, as if she found his frustration amusing, but she remained serious. More importantly, we must prepare for opposition. Ethan nodded. You mentioned that before. Extremists, right? Karilla's tail flicked once. Yes, some believe the Volteri should not align with humans. They see us as superior and view your species as reckless, unpredictable. Ethan smirked. They're not entirely wrong about that. Karilla gave him a look, but there was no true anger in it. Regardless, these groups will not be pleased by our bond. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. All right. So, worst-case scenario. Karilla's expression darkened. An attempt to remove the bond. By any means necessary. Ethan's stomach tightened. He wasn't naive. He knew what that meant. You're saying they might come after us. Karilla nodded. It is possible. Ethan shook his head. All of this over a tail touch. He muttered under his breath. Karilla's ears twitched again, but she simply continued walking. We must remain cautious. I have already arranged for additional security. Ethan sighed. I still don't like the idea of hiding behind bodyguards. Karilla stopped walking and turned to face him directly. This is not about pride, Carter. It is about survival. Ethan met her gaze. I get that. But if we're going to be bonded, I need to be able to protect myself too. Carilla studied him for a long moment. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she gave a slow nod. "Very well. If you are to stand by my side, then you must learn to defend yourself as a Volteri would." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering to train me?" Carilla's tail flicked in what almost looked like amusement. "Unless you prefer to remain defenseless." Ethan grinned. "I'll take the training." Carilla nodded. "Then we begin tomorrow." Later that night, Ethan sat on the balcony of his temporary quarters, looking out at the cityscape of the Volteri homeworld. The skyline was breathtaking. Tall, elegant towers with glowing blue energy streams running through them. Above, the night sky was a deep violet, with 2 moons casting soft silver light. Despite the beauty of the scene, Ethan couldn't relax. His life had completely changed in a matter of hours. This morning, he had been a simple diplomat. Now, he was part of an alien bonding ritual, dealing with political enemies, and about to start combat training with one of the most respected warriors of the Volteri. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. How do I get myself into these situations? Before he could answer his own question, his wrist communicator beeped. He glanced at the screen. An incoming message from Earth's diplomatic office. With a tired groan, he accepted the call. A holographic image flickered to life. A middle-aged man with graying hair and a sharp, serious expression. Ambassador Richard Vale, one of the top human diplomats. "Carter," Vale said, his voice cool. "I just received the report from the Volteri Council." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Let me guess, you're not happy." Vale's expression didn't change. "The situation is complicated. That's one way to put it." Vale folded his hands. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This bond isn't just a cultural matter. It has political consequences." Ethan sighed. "I know, but I wasn't going to let Carilla be exiled over an accident." Vale narrowed his eyes. "And now, because of that accident, you are permanently tied to one of the most influential figures in the Volteri government. Do you understand what that means?" Ethan leaned forward. "It means humanity just got a direct link to one of our strongest allies." Vale was silent for a moment. Then he gave a small nod. "That is not entirely wrong." Ethan smirked. "See, I'm not completely reckless." Vale sighed. "For now, keep a low profile. The Council will watch you closely. Any mistake could damage our relationship with the Volteri." Ethan nodded. "Understood." Before ending the call, Vale gave him one last serious look. "And Carter, be careful. There are people, on both sides, who won't be happy about this bond." The transmission ended, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. He exhaled slowly. Be careful. Right. That was easy to say. The problem was, someone was already watching him. Unknown to Ethan, a figure stood in the shadows of a distant rooftop, their glowing blue eyes locked onto him. A small device in their hand blinked with red light. A silent message was sent. Target identified. Await further orders. The training arena was larger than Ethan had expected. It was an open-air structure, surrounded by tall, curved pillars that shimmered with blue energy. The floor was smooth, polished stone, marked with faint, glowing lines. Above them, the sky was still painted in early morning hues, and the air was crisp and cool. Ethan stood in the center of the arena, rolling his shoulders as he prepared for what was coming. Across from him, Carilla stood with her arms crossed, her golden eyes watching him with sharp focus. She was dressed in a more casual version of her ambassadorial robes, light, flexible, and clearly designed for movement. Her silver tail swayed gently behind her, but unlike before, it was controlled. "This is a mistake," Carilla muttered, shaking her head. Ethan grinned. "That's a great way to motivate your student." Carilla sighed. "You are a diplomat, Carter. You have no experience with combat. You do not even understand basic Volteri techniques." Ethan smirked. "Well, that's why I'm here, to learn." Carilla studied him for a moment, then flicked her tail. "Very well. Human, let us see if you can at least survive the first lesson. Ethan rolled his shoulders. Bring it on. Karila moved so fast, he barely saw her coming. One moment, she was standing still. The next, she was right in front of him, sweeping her leg under his feet. Before Ethan could react, he was on the ground, staring up at the sky. Karila let out a long sigh. This is going to take time. Ethan groaned, rubbing his back. Okay, lesson 1. You're fast. Got it. Karila stepped back and crossed her arms. Speed is only part of it. You rely too much on your eyes. The Valteri do not just see, we sense. Ethan sat up. Sense what? Karila's tail flicked. Movements. Energy shifts. Changes in the air. She crouched slightly, her sharp eyes focused on him. Close your eyes, Carter. Ethan hesitated, but after a moment, he did as she asked. Now, Karila said, her voice softer, do not listen for sound. Feel the space around you. Ethan frowned. Feel how? Before she answered, Ethan sensed something. A faint shift in the air, a movement just ahead of him. Instinctively, he moved to the right, and a second later, he felt Karila's leg sweep through the spot where he had been sitting. He opened his eyes in surprise. Hey, I dodged that. Karila raised an eyebrow. A small victory, but you are learning. Ethan grinned, getting back to his feet. All right, what's next? Karila's ears twitched in what might have been amusement. Now we test your endurance. Ethan's grin faltered. That sounds unpleasant. Karila simply smiled. Meanwhile, in the shadows, high above the training arena, perched on a rooftop, a figure watched the session unfold. Their glowing blue eyes flickered as they adjusted their small recording device, zooming in on the human and the ambassador. A soft chime echoed in their earpiece. A voice followed, a cold, emotionless tone. Report. The figure spoke in a quiet, precise voice. The human is being trained by the ambassador. Their bond appears to be strengthening. A pause. Then the voice returned. Unacceptable. Prepare for intervention. The figure nodded once. Understood. The communication ended, and the figure leaned forward slightly, eyes locked onto Ethan Carter. The time for watching was almost over. Soon, they would act. Back in the training arena, Ethan collapsed onto the ground, panting. His shirt was soaked in sweat, his muscles ached, and his legs felt like jelly. Karila stood over him, arms crossed. You lasted longer than I expected. Ethan groaned. That was brutal. Karila crouched beside him, her golden eyes studying his exhausted form. Pain is a teacher, Carter. You must become stronger. Ethan managed a weak chuckle. I think I learned enough for today. Karila exhaled through her nose, but to Ethan's surprise, she offered him a hand. He took it, and she pulled him to his feet with ease. As Ethan caught his breath, Karila's expression grew more serious. Carter, there is something you must understand. This is not just training. You are in danger. Ethan's tired expression faded. You think someone will attack? Karila nodded. I do not think. I know. Ethan ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Great, and here I thought this was going to be a normal diplomatic trip. Karila's tail flicked. Nothing about this is normal. Ethan exhaled. All right, then we better be ready. Karila studied him for a moment, then nodded. Yes, we must. What neither of them knew was that danger was already watching, waiting. And soon, it would make its move. The sun had begun to set over the Valteri capital, casting a golden glow across the towering buildings. The city's energy lights flickered on, illuminating the smooth, curved pathways that stretched between the structures. Ethan Carter walked beside Karila, his muscles still aching from the intense training session earlier. His mind, however, was focused on something else, the growing sense of unease. Karila had warned him, "You are in danger." He believed her. Something felt off. He couldn't explain it, But every step he took sent a strange sensation up his spine, like unseen eyes were watching him. They had left the training arena and were now walking toward the embassy. Two Valteri guards followed a short distance behind, their sharp gazes scanning the area. Ethan leaned closer to Karela. "Are you feeling it too?" Karela's silver tail twitched. "Yes, something is not right." Ethan glanced around. The city was peaceful, the streets filled with Valteri citizens going about their business. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet, his gut told him otherwise. Karela suddenly stopped. Her golden eyes narrowed. "We are being followed." Ethan's heart rate spiked. "Are you sure?" Karela didn't answer immediately. Instead, she exhaled slowly and flicked her ears. Then, in a soft but firm voice, she said, "Keep walking. Do not react." Ethan did as she said, forcing himself to stay calm. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he kept his pace steady. The guards behind them had noticed too. One of them subtly touched the communicator on his wrist, a silent signal. Ethan's eyes darted to the reflections in the tall glass buildings around them. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the ordinary movement of the crowd. Then he spotted it. A shadow, a figure, hooded, moving too smoothly through the crowd. They weren't just walking. They were hunting. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was it. The attack was coming. Karela's tail flicked once, a silent signal of her own. The guards responded instantly, subtly shifting their positions, preparing for action. Then the world exploded into motion. The ambush. A flash of silver metal. A sharp whistle of air. Karela spun instantly, her claws flashing as she deflected a thin, needle-like projectile that had been aimed straight at Ethan's neck. The projectile clattered to the ground with a metallic ring. Poisoned, Ethan realized immediately. The attacker moved fast, breaking from the crowd and lunging forward. A humanoid figure, tall, covered in dark armor, with glowing blue eyes. Their hands wielded twin energy blades, crackling with dangerous light. The guards reacted, drawing their weapons, but the assassin was too fast. Karela didn't hesitate. She met the attack head-on. With an almost effortless grace, she ducked beneath the first strike, twisting her body to avoid the second. Her silver tail whipped around, catching the attacker's wrist and knocking one of the energy blades loose. Ethan took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to move, but he wasn't just a spectator in this. He had trained for this. His eyes caught sight of the fallen blade. Without thinking, he dived forward, grabbing it. The weapon was surprisingly light, vibrating slightly in his grip. No time to think. Just act. The assassin recovered quickly, flipping backward and preparing for another strike. Karela snarled, her fangs bared. "You are a fool to attack us so openly." The assassin said nothing. But suddenly, 3 more figures appeared, hidden allies. Ethan's stomach dropped. Of course it wouldn't be just one. The guards engaged immediately, drawing their weapons and clashing with the newcomers. The street erupted into chaos. Flashes of energy, the sound of metal striking metal, the gasps of civilians scrambling for cover. Karela moved with the speed of a trained warrior, striking at the assassin with a series of rapid blows. The enemy barely blocked in time. Ethan gripped his stolen blade. His heart pounded. This was it, his first real fight. One of the new attackers locked eyes on him. Ethan barely had time to react before a sharp blade came swinging toward him. He ducked. Barely. The enemy pressed forward. Ethan blocked, countered, dodged. His movements weren't perfect, but Karela's training had already helped. He wasn't helpless. The fight raged on. The guards managed to take down one of the attackers, but the others were still strong. Then the assassin made their move. They weren't aiming for Ethan anymore. They went straight for Karela. Ethan saw it happening in slow motion, the enemy shifting their stance, preparing to strike at her exposed side. Karela was still locked in combat with another attacker. She wouldn't turn in time. Ethan didn't think. He moved. With everything he had, he threw himself forward, using his body as a shield. The assassin's blade slashed across his arm. Pain exploded through him, but he didn't let go of his weapon. Gritting his teeth, he swung back, striking the assassin's shoulder and forcing them backward. Karilla turned sharply, her golden eyes widening as she saw Ethan bleeding. Something changed in her expression. A low, dangerous growl escaped her throat. Then, in a blur of silver and gold, she attacked with full force. The assassin never stood a chance. In one swift movement, Karilla disarmed them completely, flipping them onto the ground with a powerful strike. The other attackers saw their leader fall and immediately retreated. Within seconds, they vanished into the shadows. Ethan, still holding his injured arm, let out a shaky breath. Well, that was fun. Karilla was beside him in an instant, her hands inspecting his wound. Her ears were pressed flat against her head, a clear sign of distress. "You are injured." Her voice was low, urgent. Ethan managed a weak grin. "Yeah, but at least you're okay." Karilla looked at him, something unreadable in her golden eyes. Then, softly, she said, "Foolish human, you do not understand what you have done." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Karilla exhaled, her tail curling slightly around his arm as she helped him stand. "The bond. It has deepened." Ethan's eyes widened. What did that mean for him? The Valteri Medical Center was quiet, the air filled with the faint hum of healing machines. Soft blue lights lined the walls, giving the space a calming glow. Ethan Carter sat on a medical bed, his arm bandaged, but the pain had mostly faded. Valteri medicine worked fast. Across from him, Karilla stood with her arms crossed, her golden eyes sharp. Her tail flicked back and forth, a sign of deep thought. Ethan sighed. "All right, you've been staring at me for 10 minutes. Just say what's on your mind." Karilla exhaled through her nose. "You are reckless." Ethan chuckled. "You're welcome." Karilla's tail flicked harder. "No, Carter, you do not understand." She stepped closer, her expression serious. "You threw yourself into danger. You bled for me. Among my people, this is not a small thing." Ethan frowned. "I was just protecting a friend." Karilla shook her head. "To a Valteri, this is more than friendship." She hesitated, then said in a softer voice, "You have sealed a sacred bond." Ethan blinked. "Wait, what?" Karilla sighed, as if she knew this would be difficult to explain. "The moment you touched my tail, you already began forming a connection with me, even if it was unintentional. But now, by shielding me with your own body, you have made a choice, even if you did not realize it." Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions. "So, what does this mean? Am I, like your battle partner now or something?" Karilla's ears twitched. "It is deeper than that." She sat beside him, her tail curling slightly near his uninjured arm. "A Valteri bond is for life, Carter. It is rare. It is sacred. It cannot be undone." Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. "So, what? You and I are stuck together now." Karilla's lips curled slightly in amusement. "Yes. You are mine now, human." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but stopped when he saw the soft warmth in her eyes. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a trap. It was trust. A heavy silence filled the room before Karilla finally spoke again. "Do you regret it?" Ethan thought about everything that had happened. The training, the fight, the way she had defended him as fiercely as he had defended her. Did he regret it? He shook his head. "No, I don't." Karilla studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she wrapped her tail around his wrist. Ethan tensed, feeling the warmth of it. Karilla's voice was soft but firm. "Then our bond is complete." Ethan took a deep breath. "So, what happens now?" Karilla's tail gave the slightest squeeze before she stood up. "Now," she smiled slightly. "Now we prepare." Ethan raised an eyebrow. For what? Karilla's golden eyes gleamed. For whatever comes next. And somehow, Ethan knew, this was only the beginning.